Welcome to Toksave, Culture Talks, the podcast of Paradisec, the Pacific and Regional Archive for digital sources in endangered cultures. I'm Jodie Kell.
And I'm Stephen Gagao. These are conversations with people who have personal and cultural connections to the languages and music in our archive.
In the beginning of the dreamtime people, when you hear the crop ring roar, you can see the campfire glowing and the myths and legends told. They lived a healthy and quiet life before the white man came. They used their skills to survive on. Now they're just memory of old.
You are listening to the song Buried in the Sand, written and sung by Gudjal musician William Santo. This episode will delve into William's efforts, inspired by his connection to music, to uncover and share knowledge about Gudjal language, history and culture.
William Santo is a Gudjal elder, musician and author. He compiled an extraordinary history about his family, published in 2016, called Maggie and Charlie Santo, the history of the Santo family of Charters Towers. The Charters Towers region of North Queensland is home to the Gudjal people and their language. Gudjal hasn't been spoken as a first language for some decades. Only a handful of recordings of the language were ever made, most by linguist and anthropologist Peter Sutton.
Peter Sutton lived and worked with Aboriginal people in Queensland and the Northern Territory for over 40 years. And since 1979, he assisted with more than 50 Indigenous land claims. He has published and co-authored more than 15 books on Aboriginal languages, art, culture and land rights. And his book titled The Politics of Suffering, Indigenous Australia and the End of the Liberal Consensus, published in 2009, reflects upon all he has seen and questions Australian public policy over that time. In the 1970s, Peter recorded Gudjal language and culture, working with elders Ranji Pope and Freddie Tumba. We interviewed Peter separately to William due to our inability to all get together over COVID times. But through the conversation, you get a sense of a strong relationship supporting William in his work on the Gudjal language and culture over many years.
William Santo has authored 4 books in Gudjal, including My Country in Gudjal and English and the Gudjal Pocket Dictionary, drawing on Peter's recordings and in collaboration with linguist Cassie Nankaro. His books are possibly the only books written in the Gudjal language, but this is set to change. Last year, William teamed up with Alex Anderson, a University of Sydney linguistic student, and they wrote a learner's guide to Gudjal and created a language learning podcast. You will hear excerpts of their podcast during this episode, creating a synergy as we hear how William and Alex have utilized Peter's original recordings of the voices of William's elders to revive the Gudjal language. Alex's supervisor and longtime supporter of the Gudjal Language Project is linguist and music researcher Myfany Turpin from the University of Sydney, who you will also hear in the podcast interviewing William.
William's song, Buried in the Sand, questions what happened to the sacred ground, the clapsticks and the sound of the didgeridoo. The chorus mourns, now they're buried in the sand. This episode will discuss what was happening in Queensland in the not-so-distant past when government policy, systemic injustices and racial discrimination contributed to burying the Gudjal language and culture. But we will also hear how determined people such as William Santo and the Gudjal elders, with researchers and linguists who have supported them, can work to uncover archival materials and bring them back into the light, helping to reclaim and revitalise language and culture for the well-being of their people and for future generations.
happened to the sacred ground? Whatever happened to the clapstick keeping time? Whatever happened to the sound of the didgeridoo? Now they're buried in the sand. Now they're buried in the sand.
Welcome, William. It's great to have you on Toksave podcast.
Jarl, welcome. Hello. My name's William. I'm born in Charter Stowers, or always, that's always been my home. Charter Stowers is up not too far away from Townsville, if people don't know where it is, just inland from Townsville. Spent a lot of my time growing up in and around stations out of Gudjal country, more into Dalabara country in my early years. But spent a lot of time fishing, and there was a lot of old people around when I was growing up.
So tell us about the Gudjal language project, the beginnings of it. How did this start?
I think it started when I was involved in native title. I remember the language committee was looking for an inland person from Gudjal or Urundali to be on the committee, because I was involved with native title with Central Queensland Land Council way back then. That's when I started getting more serious about language. Before that, we used to do a lot of culture heritage. We had another organisation before Inland Land Council, King Kara. That was in the 80s.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So I'm sort of going back a bit further. That's when I started seeing all those stencil arts, and it just blew me away. And a lot
out
of
there in country in this school.
in cave paintings, and and then started seeing a lot of that stuff. I don't know, something clicked in me, and I got more interested in this sort of stuff. We just needed to bring this out, so other and we need to have more stuff on our country.
So what do you mean by bring it out for the people?
For the next generation and generation, because there wasn't enough material. And how I got my language and I got my books out, that was through the language committee at Gilligan. If I didn't get on that committee, get funding to help pay for Cassie to transcribe our Gudjal stuff and get a lot of the Gudjal stuff, we wouldn't have had that Gudjal dictionary. And a lot of the young people today, they rely on that book, and it's bringing back respect, and that people, and they feel so proud that they got language spoken there. Because back, like when I was talking to a lot of non-Indigenous people, a lot of them said, "Oh, did you speak language here?" They were so naive. And I never answered them. I just went ahead. But it sort of built up around that era from the 80s, 90s. It's sort of hard to describe that era because I was discovering myself.
Yeah.
I was discovering myself as a Gudjal person. I taught myself how to use computers, and then I'd sort of advanced back then. And a lot of that research was going to the places. Because
like going to the museums, going to
talking to other people.
Yeah.
And over time, it's sort of I built up my knowledge how I'm going to start doing all this stuff, and it's not straight away. It took years. I studied music down in Adelaide from '94, but I used to just go away because I was fascinated with history. It didn't matter what history, I was just fascinated with it. And I didn't know where my path was going up back then because I wanted to play music, and I done that. I formed a band down there and played music around Adelaide. And I think if I didn't play music back in them days, I think I would have went in a different direction. I think I would have, I really don't know where I would have went.
Do you think music helped you kind of think about language and culture? Is that what?
Yeah, me personally, I think music led me to get more serious. Then I started talking to musos and talking to other people from different areas. And I remember talking to someone in Adelaide, and they told me how the Adelaide language, how they had to start from scratch. And they said they had to get someone to go right through it, get all the language down, and then they end up getting all this language what they got today. You know, that's something might have sort of lightened something in my head about this sort of stuff.
Now they're buried in the sand. Now the donkeys are getting bigger all the time.
We will now hear an excerpt of the Gudjal language podcast created by William and Alex. It shows how they have been using archival recordings to piece together information about Gudjal language, just as William was inspired by the revitalization of the Ghana language of Adelaide.
We've been listening to the recordings, and of course, in European culture and Australian culture, Aboriginal culture were very different. So we don't have a lot of one-to-one matches between words like hello and how are you in Gudjal. But we've been listening to the recordings, and we've found some words which come quite close. So the first one is yaru, and I'll just play the recording for you because Freddie Tumba actually provides a little explanation of what it means.
Yeah, you come to a camp, you see that fella you sing out. Yellow. Yellow means I'm here. Yellow. Yeah, yellow.
So the recording's a little bit hard to hear, but he's saying when you come up to a camp or a group of people, you sing out, you say yaru. And so yaru literally means here or I'm here. But we were talking and we think that sounds a lot like what you say in English. When you go up to a group of people that you haven't seen in a while or you don't know maybe, you say hello. And so we thought a good alternative in Gudjal would be yaru, for hello. So yaru. Yaru, William?
Yarrow.
So then having these recordings has helped you to learn.
It's helping me to learn. Long time coming, because from what we're doing here with Alex and Myf, I love to bring a song out just with Gudjal language, and that's something for me because I'm going to sit down but I need to learn how to speak it properly first.
In the next excerpt from the Gudjal language podcast, William and Alex are learning correct pronunciation from the voices of Gudjal elder Harry Bunn, who William remembers from his childhood.
Next sound is the double R. So two R's next to each other are a different sound to one R in Gudjal. So this one's more of the tapped R that you hear in a lot of Australian languages. So the first word is birugu, which means wife or sweetheart, and it comes from Harry Bunn.
Birgu. Birgu.
Birugu.
Bilkul.
The next word is gari, which means son, and it comes from Harry Bunn.
Gardi. Gardi.
Gari.
Gardi.
What's Harry Bunn to you again, Billy?
My auntie's father. Yeah, Auntie Connie's father.
So you remember him from when you were young?
He's a deadly old fella. An old, stockman, and I still stuck in my mind. I can still see him sitting out in the bed where the kitchen is, just sitting there, and Auntie Connie, she had a really good sense of humour. I really loved her, because I used to go around to my cousins all the time.
Why do you think Harry Bunn talked to Peter Sutton? What was he hoping to achieve, do you think?
I think old uncle, he just wanted to be heard, at that time, because a lot of old people were dying. A lot of them wanted to get their stuff out.
Do you remember the first time you heard them?
I was sitting there, most times I was sitting on my own, just listening to the tapes, But it was a funny feeling, just the way it was pronounced. Yeah, listening to it on tape, it just, I don't know, it's just when you're by yourself and there's no one around, you just get so excited in your moment, and I, sometimes I get feelings. Someone's pushing me to bring this stuff out. That's what I feel.
That's a little magpie.
That was Little Magpie, sung by Gudjal elder Freddie Tumba, recorded on Palm Island in 1970 by Peter Sutton. We now talk to Peter about his memories of Freddie Tumba and working with Gudjal elders in Queensland in the 1970s.
What was Freddie Tumba like when you met him?
He would have been about 65, 70. He was tubby. He was energetic. I think he was rather isolated. He was quite jovial, he was having fun. He was being respected for something that he could do, and probably in that place nobody else could do. The first songs they're clearly songs that have been learned through endlessly repeated exposure to ceremonies and gatherings.
Yeah.
With the falling coda at the end and so on. That's the ancient, mainland style.
Kai Maranguna, Baguli Wayanguna, Kai Maranguna, Bindi Bindi, Gora. Kai Maranguna, Guli Wayanguna, Kai Maranguna, Bindi Bindi, Gora. Kai Maranguna, Guli Wayanguna, Kai Maranguna, Bindi Bindi, Gora. Kai Maranguna, Guli Wayanguna, Kai Maranguna, Bindi Bindi, Gora. Kai Maranguna, Kuli Wayanguna, Kai Maranguna, Bidi Bidi Gura, Kai Maranguna, Kuli Wayanguna. A little boy, he jumped a barbed wire fence and he cut his bindi. And he lay down, and some of the other old people come along and ask him, what's the matter? Oh, he told them he cut his bindi with a wire. And they made a song over it.
I've written down bad-tempered wire, and Benji Ngora, Kain Matara, Kuli Waya. Those are the basic textual terms. And the translations are Benji is belly, and Benji is belly in Creole. I don't think it's from this language. Ngura is cut. Kain Matara is playing, and Kuli is cheeky or bad-tempered, and Waya obviously is the English word wire. So there was a genre of what you might call contact songs in old-fashioned language. They often involve things like falling off a horse.
And they were probably shared around by the stockmen as they moved across stations.
I think so. Just remembering what do you do at night when you're out in the bush and you've done a full day's work. If the Aboriginal guys reached a critical number, I would think that it's then worthwhile having a singing night every now and then.
When was the first time you came across the Gudjal language in your...
That was at the Eventide Men's Home in Charters Towers. And that was the 5th of August 1970. I had been given his name by the Clerk of Petty Sessions. These people were part of the old administrative network. The Clerk of Petty Sessions kept records of who was under the Act, that is the Aboriginal Act, and therefore decisions weren't entirely their own. They couldn't move without permission. They couldn't get married without permission. It was a very draconian, and they could also be moved without any kind of trial or test. If they did something that was considered wrong out in Whoop Whoop, then they'd be sent to Palmer Island. So at the CPS, he listed at Eventide Home 2 people, Palmer Lee Chew and Rangi Pope. And so I went to the Eventide Home that day and met Palmer Lee Chew, but he was no longer able to communicate, and Rangi Pope, who pronounced his language name as Gudjal. So I went there, and my note says Rangi Pope, Gudjal speaker, born Herberton, about 68 years old. So the next day I went back and worked with Rangi again. I was allowed to work with Rangi so long as a man in a khaki uniform sat and watched that we weren't doing anything wrong, like, for example, rallying for land rights or something like that. That people like scholars who were moving amongst Indigenous people in Queensland were likely to be under surveillance. And it would intensify if you looked like you were working on land rights, which later I was, but initially it was all about language and all about endangered ones particularly.
And did they follow you wherever you went, like this?
That was just for the first day, and he sat there and he got incredibly bored because we weren't talking about rugby league or anything really interesting. So he got bored eventually and left me to my own devices. And it happened at Palm Island too. An Aboriginal guy who was in tracker's uniform, again khaki, was assigned to be the guy who kept an eye on Sutton. But our car number plates were circulated to police later on in the mid-70s, and the police were expected to report to the special branch in Brisbane. Anyway, there's a fairly amusing account of that stuff in my book, The Politics of Suffering.
It is distressing to hear Peter recollect how Queensland government policy in the 1970s restricted the freedom of Aboriginal people and put up barriers for engaging with and recording language and culture. We also asked William about issues he and his community faced in the following decades in their efforts to regain their land and reclaim their language and culture. Like, what's been really difficult for finding resources and reclaiming this language?
Well, only one station owner gave us a lot of material, and that was Bluff Downs. But we had the Santo family always had a really good relationship with Bluff Downs, and we treated them as like a family, even though the claim went over their area, covered their area and everything like that. But I think it spooked a lot of people back then. They thought we were just going to come on their country and take their stations and everything. They just didn't understand about native title back in them days, because the media was just throwing a lot of this stuff out and caused a lot of friction. I remember when I was working for Inland Land Council back then, I was a chairperson back then. I was sending one of my fellas out. The gate was locked, and and the station owners said that we'll shoot any blacks on sight. Back in them days, and there was a lot of damage of sacred sites out there. That cave painting threw dynamite and blew a lot of this stuff up. It saddens me, because people this is what we had to tolerate. And I'm talking not only that, my mum too.
The smile of an old man and his wife are gone. They remember.
We asked William and Peter about when they first met and started working together on Gudjal language.
I went down to Adelaide in 94. I went down and seen a lot of the museum pieces of our axe heads coming from Bletchley Park. And then I found out that one of our message sticks over in the German museums, when I was looking into all this stuff, and I was fortunate to meet Peter Sutton. But I didn't know the questions to ask him, because you got to realise back then I was still raw and trying to get my head around a lot of this stuff. It built up in time, but it took years to build up, progressing with this Gudjal stuff. He was so happy for that dictionary to come out when and a Gudjal person's working on it. He was so pleased back then. And I think I've got a special relationship with Peter, more because he'll ring me and I'll ring him. So we're on the phone often.
When did you first meet William?
At the South Australian Museum in the Science Centre, I think it was. I can remember, I have a mental image of his face when we talk, and we talk on the phone probably several times a year.
William talks about when he first met you that he felt like he was raw. He didn't know he was beginning on his journey.
Gunga.
Yeah.
He was gunga, uncooked. Well, if it's a tree, it's green.
How do you feel about the work he was doing on the Gudjal language?
I've always had a lot of admiration for William's. First, the fact that he's interested in the deep past of his own people. Not everybody is. Secondly, that he's been so persistent over such a long period, and he might have been daunted a few times, but he's still here. And he's still going. Yes, languages need people like William. They're not going to be rejuvenated by standard sort of rote learning kinds of processes. There needs to be social engagement, and William's a very socially engaged bloke. He seems to have a big knowledge of older people who've passed away. You find that so often that sometimes it's one young person out of 100 who wants to listen to the old people and spend time with them. Maybe go out fishing with them, that sort of thing, And they're the quiet ones who often end up as the elders 30 years later, who are the ones who actually know more than the rest.
Were you listening to language when you were young? Do you remember hearing language and talking about it?
For me, language was there, because I remember Mum and Dad, especially Mum, we used to go over Palm Island, because a lot of Mum family were over Palm back in the middle 60s. We used to go over on a just a small little boat. Took nearly most a day to get across from Townsville to Palm Island. Back in them days on Palm, a lot of Mum's cousin sisters, Whiney side. But back in them days, they used to have big crobberies on Palm Island, and everyone used to just all come together on this football field. They used to have a big Cub Murray. Cub Murray mean hungy, Cub Murray. A lot of the tribes, you had all the inland tribes, you had coastal tribes, you had people from Torres Strait Island, all was plonked on Palm Island. Because back then was a Punish colony, I was pretty young, but I had really fond memories. I used to walk around Palm, and because Mum was pretty popular back in them days, everyone knew her, because she arrived on Palm in 1936 with her family and spent 1 year in the dormitories before she was made to go out and work. She was probably 12 or 13, had to scrub floors, I remember all these tribal groups, they had all these different paintings, different markings on their bodies. That tells them where they belong, where they come from, what country. And so all these people, back in them days, they used to come together and do big crobbery. And then they have a big feast. For me, growing up, I was always around old people listening to language.
Yeah.
even though I didn't understand what they was talking about, it was all, they were talking it all the time. I spent a lot of early years out in the stations, like Lincoln Spring and then Wandavale. We had a lot of the old ringers, stockmen, but they were from different areas. They wasn't Gudjal. So a lot of these stockmen, you know, there was good ringers back in them days. And
they were travelling around, weren't they?
Yeah, but I was fortunate. When I used to go out to Wandavale, Pat Brisky used to pick me up from my home in Milchester Road. You know, I was probably maybe 7 or 8, maybe older. And he just wanted a companion when they'd taken or had to go pick the old stockmen up out Wandavale. They used to take me fishing. But I never used to fish. I used to just watch them when I used to catch turtle, those bungaroo long-necked turtle. In our history, oral history was so important to hand down to people, especially us young ones who want to listen. Yeah, so I was lucky. I was the one that listened.
Mugina brother.
That's your older brother or your
Mugina, oldest or oldest, youngest or oldest. Mugina.
You want to just sit back a bit, sir. That goes for both brothers.
Both, goes to the both.
You don't have special word for younger brother.
Yeah, Mugina.
Oh, it goes for older sister too.
Yeah, it goes to that. Mugina. And mother might say to him, mother might wonder, his brother is not with him. Mugina wonder. He asked him, he said, where's your brother? She might say, Yara Yanina, Kani. That means he went down there, long way away. Kani means he's gone, way down there.
Yara Yanina, Kani.
Yeah. Yara Yanina, Kani. That means he went away up there, long way away.
If you were talking to some students, is there advice you'd give them in terms of working with people as they work on language?
My advice for young people is when you talk to elders, you don't stand above them. You sit same level, and sit behind them. Don't sit in front of them till they ask you to sit in front of them. One thing with young people, I know they want to bring out knowledge. You need to explain to them, or have another person that are from that same area to sit down with the old people, explain what this person's doing. There's also have to be a contract between, especially with their information and stuff that shouldn't be written. See, with probably Alex, I sort of liked his personality from the start, and he was that motivated to go, and he showed a lot of respect back to me. He's always mentioned me in my emails, I better go back. That's showing respect. And you got to realise that that's not his language. That's my language.
What advice would you give to students today when they're approaching fieldwork and looking at recording interviews or songs with Indigenous people?
Firstly, be yourself. People know when you're pretending to be more polite than you really are. People from a European background, particularly like me, they have presuppositions which are so unconscious they can't see them. So getting rid of those is not easy. But listening, don't always ask questions. Allow people to go on from the last thing they said to expand into their own area of interest. Don't keep pulling people back to what you're after. This is their language, and it's their decision to actually take part in recording.
What do you call his head?
One bun. Head. Walumu, Euro.
Walumu.
Yeah, Walumu. Euro. Yeah. 2 eye.
What do you call it?
Yali. Yali. Two eyes. Oja. Oja.
Gudjal.
Your nose.
That's a nose.
Tawa. Mouse. Tawa.
Tawa.
Mouse. Kingurangu. Hair.
Kingurangu.
Hair.
Yeah, but one thing I want to show respect to is my old people that are, passed on, and the elders that are present, and my young leaders too. One thing is that everything I'm doing it for the Gudjal people of Charters Towers.
Good song.
Thank you, William, Peter, Alex, and Myf, for your involvement in and contribution to our Toksave podcast on the Gudjal language and culture. This episode discussed how racist attitudes and government systems contributed to cultural practices and language being buried in the sand. William, your work is inspiring as you dig deep into Gudjal language and culture, bringing it back into the light. We wish you the best for your future publication, and we can't wait to hear your songs in Gudjal language.
Thank you to our listeners, and thank you to the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies for the use of Peter Sutton's 1970s recordings. If you wish to access the Sutton collection, you can find a link to the IATSIS catalogue on our website. If you would like to access the full interviews with William and Peter in the TCT1 collection, or the Gudjal language podcast in the WS2 collection, or find out more information about Paradisec, the work we do, and the online catalogue, you can visit our website at www.paradisec.org.au.
Toksave Culture Talks was launched as part of the United Nations International Year of Indigenous Languages in 2019.
We would like to acknowledge the support of the Australian Research Council's Centre of Excellence for the Dynamics of Language and the University of Sydney, the University of Melbourne, and the Australian National University.